What's up guys, the Strongboys19 here, and welcome back to the segment called Classic Albums Revisited. This album, along with Electric Light Orchestra's A New World record, has been mentioned on a post that I've posted on my channel's community section, and obviously this album that I'm going to review got the highest votes. Today I'm going to be reviewing the 1978 masterpiece from one of my most favourite musicians of all time, Brian Eno, entitled Ambient 1 Music for Airports. This is an album that was released around the time for Eno as a solo artist, where he previously did become an involving musician for working on albums with different musicians. Previously, around the time after his work as an art rock experimental glam type musician, he would become an involving artist to work with musicians, as previously, before this album came out, he worked with King Crimson's Robert Fripp for albums like No Pussyfooting and my personal favourite Fripp and Eno album, Evening Star. Before this album was elevating into popularity of music, Eno was involved with David Bowie because he was beginning his Berlin trilogy through his own vision with Bowie on albums like Low and Heroes. Ambient 1 Music for Airports is, to me, an album that is not only one of my favourites, but it's one of my top 25. This is not the first album in the ambient part of his discography, because as many Eno fans know about this, he did make an album called Discreet Music back in 1975, which is an album that was involving his very first time idea of making a term called ambient music. And in my opinion, while Discreet Music is another classic, that half-an-hour long composition is one of my most favourite pieces Eno did create. But before Eno did develop this beginning style of music, in my personal opinion, there are different musicians before Eno who would be involved for making music that would be later on a new discovery to name the term ambient music, because earlier musicians have invented a different style that involves more drones and sustaining notes, but I think Eno did pioneer the popularity term of ambient music, because I think Discreet Music was the beginning point when Eno discovered a sound of his that would later on become a signature sound. Ambient 1 Music for Airports is the first in his ambient series. He did release 3 more albums. After Ambient 1, there's Ambient 2, The Plateau of Mirror in 1980, the Ambient 3, Day of Radiance EP, but with Laraji doing the music for it, and Ambient 4, On Land, released in 1981. This is an album which heavily details around a significant concept. I say significant because it is fascinating. Through the background on the developing stages, Eno was spending several hours inside an airport in Germany, and he became annoyed by the uninspired atmosphere as well as the music that was playing through the speakers. Eno decided to think of an idea to make music designed for airports, as he quoted those 3 words. He wanted to make the album be involving with different situations in terms of travelling sakes. Eno did say a really interesting piece around the album in particular, and I quote on the album's liner notes: "Whereas conventional background music is produced by stripping away all sense of doubt and uncertainty, and thus all genuine interest from the music, ambient music retains these qualities. And whereas their intention is to brighten the environment by adding stimulus to it, thus supposedly elevating the tedium of routine tasks and levelling out the natural ups and downs of the body rhythms, Ambient music is intended to induce calm and a space to think. Ambient music must be able to accommodate many levels of listening attention without enforcing one in particular. It must be as ignorable as it is interesting. And that quote sticks with me because it's what makes this album so important. It's a relevant piece of an early beginning to listen to music that will later on become a fantastic document in the way we think about music. The way I think about Ambient 1 Music for Airports is it's not only just an ambient album, but besides it was the first Eno and ambient album I have bought ever, this was a big introduction to think about another separate purpose in the way I think about music. Ambient music is not only for a genre to listen to, for studying, to meditate to, but I think this album in particular is an experience. It's an experience with a mood when you can be feeling the vulnerability, the innocence of yourself, and the mood this album does provide for you when you listen to it. It's like a big comforting one, but at the same time there is a bit of darkness and moodiness when you listen to all these four compositions. The first track, 1-1, features a few set of piano notes that were beautifully played by the legendary Robert Wyatt from one of my favourite jazz fusion bands ever, Soft Machine. And there's the only melodic arrangement on this piece, whereas with the other pieces on the album do not. After Robert decided to play these pieces, Eno then decided to change the pitch around these pieces of music and make them ongoing, creating loops, and it changes the pitches, which to me makes the sound of the album as soothing and as comfortable to hear these types of sounds, and as well as with the other sounds you will later on hear throughout this composition. 1-1 is the longest song on the album. It's 16.5 minutes, and you may think to yourself when you listen to it for the first time, it's very repetitive, but what it does, it has later sounds through the synthesizers and electric piano that it creates a beautiful atmosphere, and it's a texture when you can just ignore that repetition. And I think the repetition is not the flaw to think about, because it is repetitive, but when you sink into what is going on, whereas there's not a lot of stuff happening, it touches a big feeling. The reason why Eno wanted to make the album in this way, I think it perfectly fits in this whole concept. 2-1 is the only song on the album when it's very vocal heavy besides hearing the sounds of the synthesizers. And what this track does, in my experience with this song, it is not only so quiet and gentle, but it is haunting. And as Eno puts it this way, there is a bit of that connection to the mortality. And as Eno puts it this way, really it's music to resign you to the possibility of death. And I think 2-1 is one of the best examples when it comes to not only hearing the entirety of random places of these additional voices either joining together, or just to hear one or two vocal notes in any random space of time. It's like an inevitable moment is going to happen. It's completely aimless when you listen to the vocals that can either connect with one to match a vocal harmony. The album continues to grow its own imagination. I think 2-1 is more or less like a haunting one, fading in, fading out. This is another very texture-packed composition, and the vocal harmonies were so sweet and gorgeous, beautifully mixed, as Eno's idea around only a few voices to sounds through synthesizers to piano, they can paint something for the mind. And 2-1 is one of those other Eno compositions where every time I listen to it, it is as eerie, but it is as irresistible. The second half of the album, 1-2, returns back with the involvement of Robert Wyatt with the piano, the acoustic piano from 1-1, and this one sounds sublime. And like with 2-1, the vocals come in to be engaging with the resonated sounds of the piano. Wonderful piece of simplicity. All of these aimless loops do think about its own mindset, because you don't know what's going to happen when these types of sounds come in and out. It's not only a non-structured record, but it's like I think about this piece of music when I wanted to hear the piano start something and make it play out into its own musical world, and then the vocals kind of match this tonality when it combines something as blissful and as so surreal. I always admire this composition as well. And my favourite piece around the album, besides the album entirely, it's the last track, 2-2. This is the only track when Eno used an ARP 2600 synthesizer. And here's what Eno had to say about that. The second piece on the second side of Music for Airports was done with an ARP 2600. It's a beautiful sound, I think, and one that I couldn't have got from any other synthesizer that I know of. The thing that makes it so luscious is that it's slowed down, just like with what most of this album did when Eno decided to record random bits and then slow the tape down involving the pitch. And it has 3 kinds of echo on it. The echo for this composition is very, very nice. This is a composition that I do admire as heavily, as much as most of this album, as well as Discrete Music and Thursday Afternoon, an 85 released album by Brian Eno, which I definitely recommend. I've mentioned that album previously. The synthesizer sounds so warm, and it's perfect to finish the album in a separate behaviour of what this composition is. And I love everything around the album through the whole uniqueness that it has. It has been known as one of the greatest ambient albums of all time, and it's no surprise other people would see this maybe as the greatest of all time. Had become an influential album for later future musicians to create music with the ambient influence from the wizardry of Brian Eno. And not only it is one of my favourites of all time, but it is a personal and sentimental value one at that. Every time I listen to this album, I never get sick and tired of it. And you know, you can have your own experience with this album. If you have one, please address it in the comments down below. That's personally all I would like to say around Ambient 1 Music for Airports by Brian Eno. One of these albums in a different genre that I feel positive to talk about, and yet alone, even though I haven't talked about ambient music a lot on this channel, I think this album is definitely a huge introduction for you, as well as it introduced me to get into the genre, and I definitely will recommend this album to anyone. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll keep you guys posted for more videos in the near future.